Okay, welcome back to the channel, guys. I was asked by a really good friend of mine and a person that I really respect. Hey, I've been asked to go to a major conference to present some data on a research project that was industry sponsored, and they want to pay for my flight and hotel. And should I accept it? And is this something that I should think about doing? Working more with industry and things such as this, and then also things that I should be careful of when looking to work with industry. And I'll have to say that this is all about bias and how working with industry can create a bias. And I think that as long as you're aware of the potential for that bias and you have your guard up about the potential for that bias, I think it's a really reasonable thing, but you always have to be thinking about this. And I'm constantly asking myself, am I more biased because of this or that, or some other thing that I'm doing with a company? So let me first disclose the fact that I work with a lot of different companies, companies that do pay me to be a consultant for them. I work with companies that don't pay me, and I give them advice. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit, giving advice and the bias that that creates with companies. Our practice does clinical research that's sponsored by industry, phase 2 and phase 3 studies. That has the potential to create bias. Everything really in life has this potential to create some sort of bias in you that could favor one product or device over others. And we always have to be on guard for that. Now, industry knows this. And in fact, $1 billion approximately is spent annually on marketing to physicians. And we'd be foolish to think that this is money that's not well spent by industry. This is by design. They know that we can develop this bias and not realize it and prescribe these expensive products. And so it takes an extra level of constantly questioning your intentions and your decision making to be able to try and maintain some objectivity as far as that goes. So let's talk about ways that you can be influenced and different levels that industry can approach you at that can create some sort of bias. And really, the basic lowest level is food. Food, pens, those sorts of things are actually very, very cheap, and they create an avenue by which industry has access to you. And believe it or not, even a $3 meal can actually make you think about using a product subconsciously as far as that goes. That's why they do it. That's why industry brings food to the offices and gives dinners, is not only to have access, but they're hoping that that access actually will lead to return on that investment, which is writing for their drug. And that's why when they come in, the sales representatives will actually present data. They may not even talk about data necessarily. They may just, ask how things are going and support your staff and things such as that. Realize that that can create bias in you so that when you leave that meal, you go and you're thinking about that product and you use that product. Another way is through speaker programs. And the thing that I found with speaker programs is that I readily acknowledge that the money can create a financial bias, and there are certain steps that I take to try and avoid that. But in actuality, sometimes it's just having more knowledge about a specific product that can make you more often want to write that product. And I'll cite an example with Ilea. I'm a speaker for Regeneron, and there's data that I see about drying effects from Regeneron DRCR Protocol T study results and other things like that with Ilea that create this impression that I have that it's a better drug than perhaps the other drugs out there. That's a bias that's coming from additional knowledge. And that knowledge that I get, I have to acknowledge, is actually biased. The company that puts out that speaker's deck is Regeneron. I mean, they're not going to put out a speaker's deck that promotes one of their other products. So you have to realize, hey, wait a second, this deck is created with some intent of marketing. So it is a rabbit hole when you go down this bias rabbit hole. But probably the place that I found that creates the most subconscious bias with me is when I'm a member of an advisory board. And being a member of an advisory board and a company seeking your input, it's not the financial remuneration that comes from that. It's actually the feeling that you have ownership of a product when you're on a very, creative side of things as far as creating products or marketing products. It's feeling as though you're part of that team, and that creates a very strong amount of bias that you have to be very, very guarded with as far as that goes. So back to my friend who was asking, hey, do you think it's reasonable to go and present this and take this hotel and travel money to be and registration fees to be able to present this? I'd say, first of all, sure, but realize that the bias is probably not going to creep up on you from taking the actual travel funds. You're readily already thinking about that. That's a good sign that you're thinking about that in the first place. But the bias that you're going to start to get from that is really with the fact that you're familiarizing yourself more with that study, more with that product, and the input you're going to have on that presentation will create a certain bias with you. So you need to be able to look at that very, very objectively. What I found helpful is present it to some colleagues and ask them, say, hey, look, I want you to pay particular attention and make sure that I am not seeming biased, that this data makes sense to you as far as that goes. So ideally, should you accept a grant or travel money, or should you accept travel money from industry? Well, honestly, what they should do is put that money into a grant along with other companies, and then your department gives that money to you to travel to do the presentation. That doesn't seem to work as often in today's society and in academic institutions as much. And that can create also bias. I know professors of ophthalmology who would have grants in their name and they would use that travel money themselves. It wouldn't be in a larger fund that is departmentally controlled. Anyway, the bottom line is, yes, if you acknowledge that that bias could, that money could create bias within you. So there's a couple things that you can do to try and reduce your level of bias. Some things that I think have been important for me to try to be as unbiased as possible. The first thing is don't accept money, products, consulting contracts from companies that you don't believe in their product. And there's some great people in retina that I have a great amount of respect for, but I always lose a little respect when I see them representing a product that just kind of we all know doesn't really work. And you kind of ask yourself, gosh, do they know something that I don't? And with time, what you find out is no, you trust your instincts and your judgment, and whatever it was didn't work. And so you just lose a little faith in those people. And they're still my friends and I still respect them, but you just sort of think, gosh, you know what? I don't want to become a person that just talks for whoever's going to pay me. That being said, if there's a product or a company or a messaging that you don't believe in, I always like to engage those companies and give them free advice and as much of it as they'll listen to. You know, surprisingly, a lot of companies just want to hear the positive stuff. And you would think that the negative stuff allows them to be able to get better. But there are companies that do accept criticism and they'll listen to your advice and they'll make changes based on that. And you'll become a valued, albeit non-paid person for that company that could lead to really some amazing things. So if it's a product or a company that I don't believe in, I will give them free advice, mainly centered around why I think that their product isn't good enough for me to use, is a second tier product or whatnot. The second thing is continually ask yourself if the information you're presenting is unbiased and if it could be influencing you. And the place that this really I feel I struggle sometimes is when I'm doing a paid speaking program, because those decks are specifically designed to be marketing decks as far as that goes, and so I always have to try and create a kind of fair and balanced way to message those, so that it's not just overly enthusiastic around one product. Try to balance it with the data from another product, at least verbally if you can and whatnot. But always before you present something, ask, could this be biasing me and influencing me, for future care of patients? And always be critical of the companies that you're working for. I mean, watch for ways that you could be subtly biased and influenced by those companies. That's really important to be critical of them. And, companies are very welcome to getting that feedback. They want to know if they are crossing a line. Because they don't want to do that. They really don't. I mean, they want to have influence, but if they have a great product, they want it to be great on its own merits. And they don't want to have to feel like they're influencing you to use a product that's not the top tier product. And be very, very critical of yourself and your practice patterns. Constantly look at your practice patterns and say, hey, look, are my practice patterns shifting? And are those due to some of the things that some of the companies I'm working with and some of the things that I'm doing? Could a study be influencing you that you're recruiting for and whatnot? The fifth thing is to separate yourself from the financial aspects of your consulting and your work as best that you can. Now, one of the ways early on that we did this was to set up a charity fund where the money for speaking would go to a charity. That's no longer legal to do. And that also, by the way, if it's your charity, that can create influence. And can create bias within you. So the best way I found to manage this is to just not look at how much I'm being paid by any given company. And so the money gets directly deposited. I don't, read the specifics financially of the contracts, because I don't want to feel influenced by that amount. If I get a check at home, I sign it, not looking at the amount. I let my wife deposit it. I don't keep track. I probably shouldn't say this, but I don't keep track of the things that I do and how much I get paid for those things. Being asked to do them and doing them does create some bias in and of itself, but I feel like do the best you can to try and separate the money side of things from what you do and say. And realize finally that everything you do when it comes to industry has the potential to influence you. And if you're constantly thinking about that, and you're constantly aware of that, I feel like that's the best way, at least right now, that you can navigate this very tricky road of working with industry and trying to remain as unbiased as possible. But as soon as you are able to acknowledge, hey, this is going to create bias in me and I have to safeguard against that, the better off you will be. So back to the original question, you've been asked to go give a talk, and they're going to remunerate you for your travel and your hotel. I think as long as you maintain your own independence as far as the content that's presented and the way that it's presented, as long as you clearly acknowledge that the hotel is paid for and you have to put that in your slides, and the travel is provided for you, and more importantly, by doing that, you realize that and internalize that. And then as long as you're fair and balanced with everything, and you keep in mind in clinic that you're making decisions that trip, that talk did not influence, it's okay to do these things. As always, working with industry can be a very great and rewarding thing, but it is a tricky thing to do. And so I think the biggest thing is that by realizing and asking this question, it shows that you care. It's not just going to be a rote, hey, I just want to get the money and go. When you're asking that question, what should I safeguard against? You're the type of person that's also going to be watching out for the potential biases that it can bring. I hope this helps. It's given me great pause to think about these things as I recorded this. And thank you for asking. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe.